Planning that is equitable is plans that have allowed citizens from every walk of life to participate. As I said earlier, participation in these processes are very important. But planning at that level says to the broader community that consideration was given in the planning process, accommodations were given in the planning process, and expectations were given in the planning process to include every person representative of every level of our society. That's why equity in planning is important. That's the first thing. Second is that the focus of the questions on the survey tool have an outcome that ought to enhance or it's educate all of us regarding particular segments of our county that oftentimes are usually described in benevolent spaces and entitlement spaces. And we realize that's important. Benevolence does bring about charity. It does bring pantry spaces, for example, and food shelters, those things that are necessary for the well-being of certain citizens that are in a very critical space. But that isn't the whole story. There are other stories people live in, other pathways people live in. We were all connected in those pathways, regardless of our social, economic, and political spaces. So these kind of survey tools allow citizens that are forward in those spaces and those that are a little behind but catching up in those spaces to participate at the same time for a result that everyone is lifted at some point in the future. The word disadvantaged, which oftentimes sort of describes communities that are in complex spaces, if you will, having feel left out, denotes that their life from beginning to end is in a disadvantaged place. But it may not be. It may be circumstantial. It may be environmental. Both of those things aren't disadvantages, they're opportunities. However, at the end of the day, these communities are often under-resourced to fulfill some vision, some plan at its full fruition. So that's why the word disadvantage does not rest well with many of us because they're not disadvantaged. These communities aren't they're under-resourced. If Forward Pinellas and other brands that study these spaces reveal the data as it truly should be revealed, you will see how we ought to better resource these communities. And when you do, you will not have the argument of disadvantage. You will realize, oh, that's the truth. They aren't disadvantaged. They leverage this moment to their advantage. That's why we prefer the word under-resourced than a disadvantaged. Yes, disadvantaged oftentimes gives the impression that there is woe is me and woe is the neighborhood. Now, certainly there are crime statistics, poverty statistics that warrant us as citizens, as tax-paying citizens, to do something good and do something purposed. That doesn't describe the whole community. When you realize at the end of the day that your circumstances are in the process of transition, if given the right opportunity, and that disadvantage is oftentimes a consequence. So when you realize that neighborhoods that have been redlined by white supremacy and by racist practices, intentional to keep that community in some handicapped status, then you realize that you aren't disadvantaged. That in fact, there may have been discrimination. So therefore there should be litigation. There has been disruption. There has been dismantling. So to that, those things are acts from people who should be held accountable for that and not take advantage of your disadvantaged state to therefore move their own agendas forward. So to that's why under-resourced means that it isn't a lack of resource. There's a difference. There's a difference between a lack of resources and under-resourced. The lack of resources may very well say there's nothing there. Under-resourced says that I've been given the minimal when I should have been given the maximum. Had I been given my proportionate share of opportunities, I wouldn't be in these circumstances. So I'm under-resourced based upon principles of management, whether it be racist or otherwise, that have created a circumstance that I must now learn how to navigate. When you multiply that by numbers of people over time, you get these communities that look like they are disadvantaged. Go deeper and you will realize that's not the case. Florida is the grandparent state. Everybody laugh. Florida is the grandparent state. I'm a grandfather. I'm a doting grandfather. Yes, I'm that person. And so when I think about my future here and the life that I've lived and my love for my grandchild and how I know I won't live forever, it's the truth. I want to leave behind the kind of infrastructure and the society that makes her life better. Not necessarily easier because you have to work. It builds character. I always tell her, she goes, Grandpa, please. But you have to work to build character, your own resiliency, to learn more about yourself and your faith. Nevertheless, if there are hindrances because you are a Black child born to Black grandparents, if there are hindrances there, then Grandpa wants to remove most of that so that your pathway isn't as complicated or challenged unnecessarily by laws and rules and systems that will hinder your life because of your skin color or your gender. Those are the kind of things that these kind of survey tools or any other kind of process allows me as a grandparent to say, where do I remove the barriers so that my granddaughter's life can be so much more what she wants it to be and not what someone else expects of her or demands of her. The foundation for a healthy St. Petersburg is dedicated to accelerating race equity, conversations, systems change and disruption, and at the end of the day, making population health far more conducive to live in than it has been for the last, say, 100 years. We are especially interested in the kinds of the infrastructure supported by the SDOH spaces, the social determinants of health. We are particularly interested in making sure that in those SDOH spaces, there's enough advocacy, disruption, and outcome strategy that accelerates race equity throughout. So that, as I said earlier about my grandchild, at the end of the day, I love that line, at the end of the day, at the end of some time, there is enough footprint, there's enough infrastructure, there's enough momentum that old rules and old ways of doing business are gone and that we now can conduct our lives the way they should have been for the last 400 years, and in our case, the last 100 years. You can now live freely, if you will. Now, I say that lovingly. I'm looking at the life on the other side of the year 2030. Let's stop there and pause and think about the year 2030 and what that next decade should look like. It shouldn't be the same as this decade. Let this decade be the end of all of those systems, of those people, of that thing that hinders people from being who they ought to be, so that your life here is much more free. So let's work together. These survey tools, the plans of action, the dedication to that, the resourcing of those plans comes together in these next few years so that the next decade, say Vision 2040, Vision 2050, we're hearing about, have far more progressive thinking than the thoughts we've had so far. Far more. The youth of our society today should be held responsible. They're in a season of enjoyment in many ways. But as they settle down into raising children and establishing community, then the survey instruments and forward Pinellas becomes particularly important because then they will begin to think about their own children and how they grew up. Right now, they're in the phases of lots of growing up and enjoying life. And that's a good thing. You want to have those experiences. But at some point, mature people will settle down. And when you do, you begin to analyze your life at every angle, financially, faithfully, uh, your children, your capacity, your skill sets. And that's when you begin to ask the question, so where do I live? Where do I work? How do I get to work? How does my child get to work? How does my spouse get to and from work? Or how does those things? And all of a sudden you begin to have those questions. And you may be at that time taking care of your parents. It is not unusual today to have a 30 something taking care of a 60 something who has been stricken by some disease or challenge. So you may be asking that question, how do I get from my house to my mother or father's or grandparents' home, then to the clinic, into the doctor? All of those things come about as a result of the advocacy of Forward Pinellas through these survey tools. So yes, it is important that young people begin having this discussion for sure. I want to have my voice heard. That's why I took the survey. I want to be able to say when I watch the county unfold any of the survey results that I had a part in that. Forward Pinellas survey, like voting, is a citizen's responsibility. So, as a citizen, I voted, I take a survey, I participate in focus groups, I attend city council meetings, school board meetings. I am an active participant in the future of my life in this space, in this case, Pinellas County. So, therefore, if you're active in that space, then be active. Don't be reactive. So, be active, get in front of it, help to shape it, participate in the process. This is your right as a citizen. Help shape the future of our county. Help shape the future of our cities and make a better place. It sounds altruistic, but it's the truth. These processes don't exist unless you as a citizen lean in and participate. Please participate in a survey tool or some other forum or opportunity where your voice can be heard and the future is shaped by your voice. The equity survey is timely, important, necessary, and available. Take full advantage of this moment as a citizen of our county. Take full advantage of this moment in your citizenship, your leadership, your advocacy for your life, for your children, and for your family, and for your community. It's important. These survey tools are available to you. Please take full advantage. Answer the questions. Help to shape the future of our county. Thank you.